Thanks, everyone at Ethereal for joining us here. This has been a long time coming. If you think back to 2008, it really started with an idea, a reaction to a global event, and a white paper. And it really triggered a moment and a movement with the cypherpunks advocating for a technology-driven regime change. Fast forward to 2020, we are in a whole new world, a whole new ballgame. And the question that we're really going to answer over the next 40 minutes with Joe Lubin right there and Mike Novogratz is, are legacy systems and traditional industries about to co-opt, or are they going to fall away for a redefinition of a brand new world? It's going to be my pleasure indeed. And over the course of this conversation, we're going to be exploring that. We're going to be asking, is this an inflection moment, really, that has been triggered by COVID-19? Are we going to see a true transition from legacy to decentralization? And are we going to enter a brave new decentralized world? And what does that really look like? I'm Angie Lau, editor-in-chief of Forkast.news, and it's a pleasure. And our two fireside chat panelists need no introduction, but I will anyway. It's great to see you, Joe. It's great to see you, Mike. So Joe is co-founder, as you all know, of Ethereum, founder and CEO of ConsenSys. Of course, the blockchain venture studio based in New York right there, and really designed to drive adoption by governments and enterprises by Ethereum. Mike is founder and CEO of Galaxy Digital, as you know, a former Goldman Sachs partner who founded the company in January 2018, leading a $325 million fund that's developing for the EOS-based ecosystem. Also have some significant Bitcoin funds for accredited and institutional investors. And so talking about a little bit that there, and both are Princeton alums, both are leaders in the industry. Both are futurists who are paving the way to more decentralized worlds post-COVID. Hi, guys.
How are you?
Hey, Angie. How's it going? Hey, Mike. At first, I have to say that, Mike, that quarantine stash is an inflection point in its own way. It's impressive.
I started on the day of the quarantine, and I have to admit I had a diet because it was too great.
Outstanding.
I'm waiting for the handlebar mustache.
At the 12-month mark of quarantine, we'll turn it up.
Oh, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's talk about, as everybody's really shelter in place, this is truly a universal experience. Across the board, there is not one person who isn't touched by this crisis. And certainly as participants in the global economy, and really as individuals either sheltering in place in our own homes, or for those of us who still are considered essential workers and going out and making sure that at least the levers of basic day-to-day is still functional. Where are we right now, Joe, Mike, in your view, as you've been reflecting where you are, how we've evolved in this space in a very short amount of time as a result of COVID? Joe, I'll start with you.
Well, we started thinking about this discussion in terms of the different narratives that have been in play since the advent of Bitcoin. So I'll leave some of the Bitcoin narratives to Mike, and Mike's personal financial trading economic history is really remarkable, and I expect that he'll jump into that as he helps us understand how crises are dealt with and his approach to all of that. I guess, yeah, you're back on, Mike. So essentially all of this started as a reaction to the fact that we on the Ethereum project all love Bitcoin. We were Bitcoiners, and we wanted to do so much more. We wanted to take this brand new invention, digital scarcity, and enable the world to build all of its systems on it, essentially. And so it basically initially manifested itself with Vitalik trying to bring an easier way of building your own cryptocurrency into the world. It used to take weeks and months to stand up a new system and create your own crypto. And a few months into it, we were able to do that in a few lines of code on Ethereum. And so it evolved from there to bigger narratives. It went from the write your own crypto to build your own Dropbox and build your own decentralized, uncensorable Twitter. And that was really the world computer narrative. And the world computer narrative is a bigger narrative. It's really a decentralized internet or increasingly decentralized web narrative where you have protocols like Bitcoin and Ether. Hey, Mike, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I keep coming in and out.
Yeah, no worries. So you have these different protocols for trusted transactions, automated execution of agreements, decentralized storage, decentralized bandwidth, decentralized ID, and that's the decentralized World Wide Web narrative. And that's roughly where we are in terms of the Ethereum narrative. So back at the first Ethereal, I was hoping that in my speech, I was hoping that central bankers could kick the can down the road for another 5 years or 10 years and enable us to build more. And I'm not sure we're going to have that luxury now with COVID and the crisis. And it's not just a biological virus crisis, it's a global economic crisis. And so I think Mike can weigh in on this. I think we're looking at the Japanification of the planet, where growth is going to be very, very difficult as bubble after bubble gets blown. And I think we're in the last bubble, the government debt bubble. And so I think we're going to have this sort of steady state where we walk around in a bit of a daze, or with respect to the legacy economy, it walks around in a daze like zombies. But maybe that's not so bad. Maybe COVID is going to enable the builders of the new financial, social, economic, political infrastructure on decentralized protocols can take, I guess, all this new money that grows on trees and drops from the sky and potentially build new foundations. So first the new trust foundation, and then a decentralized financial plumbing infrastructure, and start bringing new industries into that kind of infrastructure. So fingers crossed, it is a positive inflection point where instead of previous inflection points where to the end of 70-year debt super cycles would end in violent conflict, maybe this one will be different, where it's all happening to us globally at the same time. It's we're all in this, and we can all take time and reflect and build together.
It's still tied very much to markets, Mike, as you know. We can think about the future, but how do we capitalize towards that future when we are seeing the volatility in the markets, not only in equity markets, but obviously in Bitcoin as well, and startups and funds around the world are impacted?
Sure. So, I'm a storyteller. I think for my whole life I've been a storyteller, and what appealed so much to crypto was the narratives, right? The first, FU to the man narrative that came out of the 2008 Satoshi paper. We're going to change the world. When I first went into ConsenSys' office, I said this bit many times. They were like plotting this revolution on, building the new world infrastructure, and I was like, that's such a powerful story. And there is this ferocity of desire for these rebels to kind of rebuild things, and that's infectious. And we had this wonderful crypto narrative through 17. I remember the first Ethereum, I can't believe it was only 3 years ago, which created this bubble that we saw in 17. It was a bubble because the story was so powerful, and usually bubbles happen around things that actually do change the world, right? There was an internet bubble that changed the world. There was a railroad bubble that changed the world. I think the blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum bubble is going to change the world. And so where are we today? I mean, today's a special day in some ways. I'll get to it. COVID has unleashed a fiscal and monetary response like we've never seen in the world. So we've never seen as big of a collapse in economic activity, literally in the history of, at least modern economics. And we've never seen as big of a response. The fiscal response from the US. Remember, we were running a 5% fiscal deficit before the crises happened. That was crazy in what Trump would say was the best economy of all time. Right? When I worked at the White House in 1984, tells you how old I am, 5% was considered, that was the Reagan era twin deficit, it was a crisis.
Uh-oh.
It was a crisis. I think the desensitization, I guess we've all been desensitized to all of the debt rates, Joe, as we wait for Mike to come back. You talk about that global debt crisis that is absolutely being triggered now. And, you take a look at the headlines right now where corporate America bankruptcies are really at the starting point. I'm gonna bring in what Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, said. He's always been candid. Anytime I interviewed him, and he was no less candid in his stark assessment of the global economy. He said that corporate America bankruptcies are only beginning right now, that corporate tax rates are going to have to do the kind of heavy lifting that the stimulus dollars are giving to the American public. Whether or not we're going to see individual tax rates rise, we're definitely going to see corporate tax rates rise. And at a time when another 33 million Americans have been added to the jobless claims line. These are changing narratives as well as we counteract really what the promise of cryptocurrency and blockchain is. As you said, Joe, Mike, thank you for coming back on. We were just referencing, as you said, it's fine. It's I think we've become all desensitized to that 5%, right, ratio. And right now we're seeing the precipice where Neiman Marcus today filed for bankruptcy protection. Following on, I mean, they're not the first. They're not going to be. They're definitely not the first. They're definitely not going to be the last. And we're likely going to see corporate tax rates rise along with individual tax responsibilities. So where does cryptocurrency live on this spectrum and these realities that we're going to have to be faced with? In your view, how does shift the
no idea why the technology broke, but I'm going to blame somebody. Listen, I was given the story that people have heard that we have this fiscal orgy going on, and it's being monetized by central banks, i.e., my mother said money doesn't grow on trees. Money is growing on trees. And so you are seeing investors look for hard assets, look for scarcity value. Something that happened today, which I think is phenomenally significant for crypto, for Bitcoin specifically, but for all of crypto, was that, Paul Tudor Jones, who's a legendary investor, a good friend of mine, put out a letter, and he actually bought Bitcoin in his fund. And so, we're making these steps. This is a big step. He is one of the most prominent hedge fund investors. He's the first one that bought crypto as a macro asset, right? It's an inflation hedge for him. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. And so we're seeing an acceleration in adoption of, first, the story of Bitcoin as a scarce asset. And I think we're just starting. And I can tell you from my own business, the amount of incoming we're getting is up limit from where we were a month ago, 2 months ago. And remember, the price is only where we were in January. And so the rally hasn't finished. It really is just starting. But overall, besides Bitcoin, each crypto ecosystem has its own community, its own narrative, right? And those are being accelerated. We're going to see the digitalization of everything accelerated. The CEO of Microsoft said, we did in 2 months what it thought it would take 2 years to do. And so you see the growth of stable coins. I think one of the powerful things for the Ethereum narrative is valuing the Ethereum network kind of like we do Facebook. And so the more network effects you get. And so having Tether move all now 9 billion, 3.5 billion to run on the Ethereum network brings people that are using that network. And so you look at DeFi and stable coins, just that alone, it's bringing more prominence and network effect to Ethereum, because all of these, other than Bitcoin, I really believe, all the other cryptos, Ethereum the most important, need over time to provide real use case. So they do get that network effect. So that community is built on something more than just store of value. It will be store of value plus something. I think Bitcoin gets lucky. It can be just store of value because it started first and it's kind of mysterious and it has the brand. The rest of cryptos can also do very well, but that's why the progress that ConsenSys is trying to make and going from ETH1 to ETH2, that story and that growth is wildly important, but it's all going to be accelerated.
Yeah. I see two narratives that are very distinct and yet they converge. One is obviously as a store of value, Bitcoin. It's kind of broken out on its own. You can describe it as digital gold. You could describe it as a hedge play, as a countermeasure to current Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world printing endless seams of money. And then on the other hand, other cryptocurrencies value, which will be driven from more of a utility base. Right. So one's a hedge, one's a utility base, and yet at the same time, one will evolve to being valued just like the other. Joe, what do you think of that?
Well, yes and no. I literally think, you know, you can, we value gold very differently than we value Facebook, right? Gold's interesting. It's a $9 trillion market cap. It's a 25 or 22 meter cube. If you've melted all the gold in the history of the universe. Think about that, like as a sculpture in Central Park worth $9 trillion. Where we value Facebook, not really on its ad revenue, we value Facebook on the network effect that it's created, how many things can be built on it, how many things can be monetized on it. I think Ethereum will be valued very similarly at one point. And so to me, you'll see the growth of Ethereum with the growth of the network. It's why I said I thought it was so important that stable coins are being built on top of it, that DeFi is being birthed on top of it. I'm sure Joe can tell you the 4-year track record. Now, listen, I think Ethereum's got its hands, it's got a lot of work on its hands. You know, this transition from ETH1 to ETH2 and being able to create the narrative around that is understandable to the common investor. I always like to see myself as a very simple guy. So I need to be able to understand it, because if I can't, the next guy, you know, I mean, the smart guys can, but like I got to be able to sell that story. And so, but I think that's where the valuation differences will be different. And even there are plenty of other cryptos that are going to try to make their run. They have to have their own narrative and they have to have their own utility.
Yeah, so I think the term cryptocurrency is a little bit unfortunate. Essentially what's going on here is a massive paradigm shift. We're building out a new kind of economy that's going to take decades to unfold and will last for many, many decades. And we started with the term cryptocurrency, and that applied initially to Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is sort of much more of a gold 2.0, a store of value, than something that I would ever want to use to buy a cup of coffee with. Ether and others started out being called cryptocurrency, and some of us felt like, yeah, we had to run with that, but it wasn't really what we thought it would. We thought of it as a crypto asset or a crypto commodity. So the general term crypto asset is, I think, going to become increasingly important. I don't expect Bitcoin or Ether to be used in day-to-day transactions, just like I don't expect electricity or gold or oil to be used in day-to-day transactions. And what we're really talking about is building the foundational layers of a new kind of economy, and cryptocurrencies will be things like DAI and Tether, etc. So those are the pieces that we will, and you know, state-issued cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies. Those will certainly have a big role. So we'll see.
That's coming fast. And I
Yeah,
think
it is
one
coming
of the things COVID has done is accelerating this idea that we are going to get a host of both state-backed stable coins and other stable coins. Maybe you should call Ether crypto infrastructure.
Yeah, it pretty much is.
Well, that's a great point. That's a great point, Mike, because are we seeing legacy systems, right? If this was supposed to be a movement, as you said, let's build something that's better. After 2008, that is really what we're talking about here. A financial system that serves the people rather than the centralized infrastructure that currently exists today. Now, COVID seems to be the brush fire that is making way for the green shoots to come up. Now, Bitcoin, Ethereum, cryptocurrency, blockchain, crypto assets, digital assets, all of this is part of the green shoot effect that we've seen over the past 10 years. Question is are they ready for prime time? Is this industry ready for prime time? Or is there a danger, as you've said, with the central bank coming in with central bank-backed digital currency, like what we're expecting to see out of China, likely in the next month or so? And certainly this conversation about digital dollar, whether or not it's actually a digital dollar coming out of Congress. Is there a danger that centralized systems are co-opting the technology and seizing that narrative? Your thoughts, Joe?
Listen, I think it's going to be both. Facebook is going to come out with Libra. They are going to have a semi-decentralized blockchain. When you really think through that, they would have been better off doing their stablecoin on Ethereum. It's very costly. They've got to run it. It's not as decentralized. Part of that is the growth of these networks and everyone's rushing. And so I don't think the final solutions are there yet, and it'll have tension both ways. I would say, I think why the excitement around Bitcoin is there, because Bitcoin's kind of a finished product if it's digital gold. We've got to also be cognizant that the rest of the space is, and Joe is better probably at telling you this than me, it's not ready next month, it's not ready next year. There's going to be big acceleration, but we're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years away from the real transformation. And so what's wonderful about this is it's accelerating, it's putting juice back and energy back into the space. But, for DeFi to go from $1 billion, our global economy is 80 trillion. And so we're going to accelerate that pace. And so I think you got to keep focused on each lane in the growth in that lane and how it's doing. And I'm, the one thing I'm sure of, like in markets, when I was in 1997 in Asia when the world blew up, and then 2008. And when paradigms change, stuff happens that you can't believe, from before, like oil trading at minus $40 or swap spreads. No one thought swap spreads could not get negative and they went to minus 80. Nobody thinks the dollar is going to really lose its reserve status. It could, and it could faster than we think. It's not my base case. My base case is the biggest used stablecoin in the world in 4 years will be a dollar-based stablecoin. But there's a growing probability that that could be wrong. And so crypto, even as a hedge, as an option to the change in the near term until the Vitaliks and scientists will can build out the infrastructure so the new world can actually operate on a decentralized way, because we're not there yet. We couldn't, if we said we're switching the lights tomorrow to be decentralized, the system would break.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Joe, maybe you could give a little bit of a time path.
I will attempt to expand on that. So is the technology ready for prime time? I wanted a lot more time to build, to mature the technology, and I'm not sure we have a lot more time. I think we have to get busy now. Fortunately, we've been busy for a number of years, and it is ready for prime time. But it's not prime time everywhere, and it really depends who you are. So if you're a consortium, a commodity trade finance consortium, it is absolutely ready for prime time because it enables you to collaborate with organizations that you previously competed with and couldn't build shared, trustworthy protocol-based infrastructure with. It is absolutely ready for prime time for the getting to be close to 1 million developers in the broad blockchain ecosystem who are essentially understanding the technology, diving in, living and breathing it, and essentially now charged, given the tools and charged with the mission of bringing the wisdom down the mountain to the people. You take this new paradigm, this new way of building things, and you have a specific domain, whether it's DeFi or gaming or a variety of other things, and we need the expertise of passionate entrepreneurs and technologists to be building the applications, and that's happening in a very big way right now.
You know what they say? They say first impressions count. When it comes to DeFi, it started out really strong in the gate, but recently hit by hacking and questioning whether or not it is ready for prime time. To your point, Joe, some of these projects are ready for prime time and some are not. And as we've seen throughout this changing narrative since 2008, where it went from the wild, wild west to ICOs, certainly not a good part of the narrative, to regulators coming in, more enterprise-grade solutions coming in. You're even seeing, the change of wardrobes at conferences. We went from studded trucker hats to suit, ties, and heels. Is that a good evolution in this space? As we get to really ensuring the next first impression of the next phase of the narrative.
I love that you mentioned the wild, wild west. I don't think banking technology is really going to catch on. We have all these cages and safes and stagecoaches, and they're all getting hacked, and vaults are getting broken into. And so essentially, humans are all about progress, and progress is all about builders building and breakers breaking, and the breakers are the people who help the builders to build better. And so decentralized finance is still very, very young. But the incredible thing about decentralized finance and all of this stuff is that it moves us from a centralized world of subjective trust to a world of decentralized, automated, objective trust. And what that means is that we're all going to be collaborating on open shared protocols. We're all going to be able to inspect those protocols, use those protocols, build on those protocols, fork those protocols if we have a philosophical issue with those protocols. And unlike a world where the priests are essentially the ones who mediate our interaction with the new money gods, or the priests are the ones who mediate our interaction with governance of nation states, we won't really need priests anymore. We'll certainly need people and tools to help us understand the technology, but the world of magic internet money Legos is basically a whole bunch of protocols for lending, borrowing, savings, exchange, trading, insurance, etc. And it's all accessible to everybody. You can be your own bank. You can take your own bank and wire it up to the insurance project that your daughter just put together. And so it's a brave new world, and we're all going to be able to operate it ourselves.
A lot of courage. Go ahead.
There's this middle step that happens, and you try to predict the future when you're in the investing business. But like what I see, I think of Calibra, the Facebook wallet, or all of these Silicon Valley, messaging systems, Telegram, who's been shot down with their ICO by the SEC. But what they're trying to build is really a wallet that creates your bank. Why the banks are so nervous is because it's banking, it's insurance, and they're going to have, the Calibra wallet will have the ability to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum on it, and it'll have stable coins. And so you might not have a guy who does everything in a decentralized world. It might be some hybrid, but we're moving to that digital world where blockchains and cryptocurrencies are going to become a much bigger part of it. There's an inevitability towards that. And so it's one reason I laugh all the time. You know, Jack Dorsey, who's got Square, and the Square app is their biggest thing is buying Bitcoin these days, and he's got Twitter, and they're decentralizing that, or at least experimenting with that. His profile on Twitter says Bitcoin. You know, the West Coast guys are all bought into this shift. And, you know, Paul Jones being one of the first prominent East Coast guys, or finance guys, are starting to say, well, maybe, right? I'll buy it as an option. And so we have this convergence, I think. And the story isn't finished, right? You know, and what 10 years looks like. But I know it's not going to look like what it looks like now.
Well, Mike, to your point, I talked to one of the Silicon Valley guys, one of the originals, Tim Draper, yesterday, upcoming Forkast podcast. You know, and he's obviously famously known for buying the Silk Road 30,000 Bitcoins at auction from U.S. Marshals after they seized that group of Bitcoins.
500 bucks or something like that?
It was 19 million. So it turned out, I did the math, it was 640 bucks per. And 40? Obviously now he's made $250 million as a result of that purchase. But look, he's made a bet on not only blockchain and Bitcoin, but also in his thesis, it's going after high cost, never anything that's high cost, but bad service, right? Right now, COVID is getting rid, on a corporate level at least, the high costs, bad service, that's going away, right? The companies that are so highly leveraged, that doesn't have a cash pile or an asset pile to depend on, that's going away. A lot of these zombie or industries, that's going away. And now the next layer is, what else is high cost, bad service? One of the industries obviously is GovTech. But with COVID and in this disruption, are people going to wake up to the fact that we could do things differently that traditional legacy companies or structure has done? Is that moment coming soon, or will there be other forces at play, like the regulators, like
Listen, regulators aren't going away. Governments aren't going away anytime soon. And so there's going to be fits and starts. Bad businesses in the legacy world are going out, and the guys with lots of resources and capital and scale are doing well. Listen, I think in the crypto space, there are 15 wannabe blockchains that compete with Ethereum that really either need to find their own space or be interoperable. Some will succeed, some won't. I, just as an outsider, don't think we need as many blockchains as everyone's trying. I mean, for Telegram to create their own blockchain, in some ways, they could do just as much using the Telegram system as a wallet, messaging system, and be able to transmit Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever else they want. And so we'll see how it all plays out. I don't think I think this is a significant moment in the acceleration. There's nothing that says we're going to kind of go from 0 to 1, right? It's going to be the hard work of building networks and building things that people want to use. And, even privacies are really complicated. Like, one of the great reasons I love the blockchain space is privacy. And what we found is, so far, people don't care as much about their privacy as I do, or at least I think they should. And so will that change or not? It hasn't yet. And so I think this is all going to unfold, and we'll see.
So from day one, ConsenSys was about convergence. It was about building out this brave new world, the revolutionaries, and holding the hands of the evolutionaries and enabling them to use the new technology to build better systems and transform their own businesses and lives. We are very friendly with government and regulators and major institutions, and we'll continue to work really closely with them. But I do think things are going to change. I do think that as governments maybe have less control of monetary systems, as people have greater control of creating different kinds of assets in an unintermediated way and trading those assets. As those assets get married to collaboration networks, and we build groupings that run according to protocols that everybody on those systems can trust, then those kinds of groupings, whether they're businesses or social networks or they form themselves to bring a cure to a particular disease, they can define their own philosophies, they can define their own objectives, they can raise their own money, and they can execute solutions to the problems that they identify. And so there's going to be a lot more power, a lot more economic and political agency in the hands of people and small organizations. And I think that's going to be a great thing, because nation states that are governed by two parties or worse, one party, have about 98% of the people not well represented.
Listen, and governments aren't all anti this space. They're not all anti-blockchain. They're not all anti-crypto. I mean, listen, China said we're going all in on blockchain. But even in the U.S., I got a call early on in the crisis where people were very worried about the fraud in the PPE sales and front running and price gouging. And the government was putting the task force together, and they wanted kind of a blockchain expert to help them figure out how you could use a blockchain. It really wasn't my bailiwick to be that expert. And so, and things were moving maybe too fast to get that set up. But that was their first thought, like, how do we do this? I thought that today I tweeted, this PPP program where, some people took $2 million. And Justin's son, from Tron was called out today. I don't know if it's true or not, but he looked kind of silly if he's a billionaire, tech guy taking $2 million from the government. Again, I don't want to accuse him of that. It was on Twitter all over. And I was like, shit, that whole thing should have been on the blockchain for public to see. You're going to take federal assistance in that time. We should see who gets it, instead of some people being shamed and other people being not shamed. And I don't think anyone in government would disagree with that. And so part of that is getting enough people that understand how to use it and how to build it, and having enough companies that can come in and help them get there fast enough. And we're not there yet, but we're moving there really fast.
Yeah.
From our vantage point, I think there are very many people in government who would disagree with that position, Mike. And we're actually in discussions.
Oh, I'm not saying, I didn't say it was the majority by any stretch, but I said they're not all opposed.
Yeah, we're actually in discussions with a nation state, and it looks like we pretty much have the contract to build blockchain-based procurement systems so that people know what's being paid for and who's getting the money.
And it will be those nation states. And you bring up a good point, Mike. China is almost leading the pack at the moment because of its centralized, very top-down, and very dominating relationship that it has with its own private sector. And so if it's championing blockchain and not cryptocurrency, but its own version of DCEP or central bank-backed digital currency, that initiative is actually really what we're observing. I want to ask you to comment on what we've recently written on at Forkast, that the PBOC has partnered up with AI giant unicorn SenseTime to develop fintech innovations for the country. That would be the equivalent of the Federal Reserve hooking up with Google to help out Wall Street. That seems, but what that stresses is two very separate systems. One is going this way, very centralized efforts using specific technology to create its own ecosystem, technology-backed ecosystem, versus the West, where it's very ground up and ground swelled and privately funded.
I said we haven't been so worried about our privacy in the U.S. Things like Facebook, it flares up, but no one's willing to pay at this point. I mean, China is the extreme example of a culture that is used to sacrificing some privacy for social good. And all of a sudden, you've got a government with this accelerating technology that now has really scary state operations that can monitor, spot, facially recognize, socially score people's behavior. I am petrified of a centralized cryptocurrency in China where they say, yeah, we don't like gay people anymore, and let's just freeze their money. And they know exactly who's gay by their shopping patterns and their search histories. And so it's a dystopian world. It could become a dystopian world with centralized data collection. One reason China's so good at AI is they have better databases because they collect it all. And so I think we could have two worlds, the behind the China curtain and the rest of us who want to preserve some privacy. And that debate has to happen in the public square of where that line is between what governments are allowed and what they're not allowed. And I think there's a healthy debate there. The most radicals say nothing, right? And I think there's a more practical answer, probably somewhere in between. But that has to continue to mature.
Yeah, unfortunately, unfortunately, I agree that we're seeing a pretty serious bifurcation of the planet. The story that you're pointing out is just another data point in the long narrative of government control. They will be incredibly good at it. They don't need a central bank digital currency to get even better at. Well, maybe it'll make them a little bit better at it. But it's a pretty scary future that we're facing potentially. We don't get a lot of economic data truth out of mainland China. Apparently, we didn't get a lot of warning and truth with respect to the current crisis. Mike was talking about essentially discriminating against certain segments of the population with a powerful system like that. That is happening if the stories of the Uyghur population is true and transplant tourism. There's potentially scary stuff going on. And I'm excited about the implications of blockchain technology in how it can create a shared reference frame, a shared source of truth, a shared trust foundation. So even if our nation states are having issues, trade disputes, etc., we can still potentially build supply chain networks that can interoperate with one another and trust each other. It's going to be necessary to instrument all the way to the sensor level. You're going to have sensors with signatures and calibration systems so that there isn't garbage into the system. Once you get good data into the system, I think we can trust with these blockchain networks that they will stay clean. And interestingly, we're hearing from different organizations that they want to interface with these new Chinese blockchain networks, these business networks, but they're concerned that unlike what blockchain was intended for, they're not really going to be able to trust that technology. And so what we're hearing is an interest in building bridges between blockchain systems that Western companies can trust and blockchain systems that are part of the infrastructure in mainland China. And so once you build those systems, you can know at least the data that's coming out of one system is trusted. And so I think building those kinds of bridges is going to be really interesting. And mostly I'm really excited about a different kind of virus, and it's an intellectual virus. It's this notion that if you build shared trust foundations, if you build decentralized systems, that they're actually really good and potentially better. at building infrastructure on, and that's the kind of virus that I think could be hard to suppress, because once engineers throughout the nation start seeing that they can build better systems and interface with Bitcoin and interface with Ethereum, they're just going to see that there's a new paradigm that looks like it's stronger and may eventually win out.
There's a new common denominator we're living at right now. There's no doubt that that's going to be a floor to these future conversations. Before I let you guys go, two critical things happening, and in the context of COVID and a post-COVID world as you look into the future. We've got Bitcoin halving, and then we have the launch of ETH. How has the narrative there changed for you both?
Well, I'll go quick and I'll let. Oh, you want to go first? You go first.
No. I said you start.
Oh, so listen, the halving in some ways was so perfectly timed because forget the technical aspect of it. Okay, the miners are going to have less to sell. The rest of the world is doing quantitative easing, and the halving is quantitative tightening. And so it just highlights that there can be digital scarcity or a scarce asset, right? We go from a 3.4% inflation rate to a 1.7% inflation rate on our way to 0.8 and lower. And so it's almost wonderfully timed with this new surge of macro enthusiasm around the problems that the money printing is causing. And then on ETH2, I think there's work to do by the community in what that narrative becomes. It finally shows we got progress and we're getting something done. And, listen, I'm not a computer scientist. These are Herculean technical feats that are being pulled off. And 3 years ago, people were like, well, it's coming. This is taking longer because it's really complicated. And Joe probably can talk to that. I do think, what needs some clarity is, what an ETH becomes if you got an ETH2 and an ETH1 and there's the same ETH, and how that whole process works over the 2 to 3 years it takes to migrate really to ETH2 for, fully as opposed to a testnet. And so, again, I'm not an expert on the technical side, but I think that narrative is important. What I think is just as important, though, for the Ether community and for the price of ETH and for the activity is that more and more things get built, even on the original ETH, that more and more, that network, right? You've got, hundreds of thousands of developers. You've got, projects. All of that growing will, lead the way for the price of Ethereum to rise, and good things happen when it goes higher, right? It just, so it's almost essential. It doesn't have to rocket, but it's got to keep going higher to bring the excitement in.
Yeah. So Ethereum 2 is indeed big and complicated, and it'll get phased in via multiple phases. But the important thing is that it is Ethereum, and it's going to be really useful virtually immediately, despite what people think. So it'll be a useful sort of theoretically in that it lands a proof of stake system, a massive proof of stake system, and shows the world that something that big and that valuable can operate at virtually zero electricity cost. So that's going to be pretty powerful. Ethereum 1 is effectively merging into Ethereum 2. Ethereum 2 is realized in 3 major phases. The first is the beacon chain, the heartbeat proof of stake. There's a testnet running right now with 3 of the major clients on it, and another client that's connecting to it intermittently. So it's really on the precipice of launch. Once that chain, the beacon chain launches, and it's launching from Ethereum 1. So staking is happening from Ethereum 1 into Ethereum 2, one-way connectivity. It's basically birthing Ethereum 2, and it's birthing a brand new technology. So it's not held back by the previous architecture. It's building this much more scalable, much more powerful architecture. Once the beacon chain is operating, it can then, or we can then reach back and create bi-directional connectivity, and we can use the new chain to finalize blocks faster on the old chain, reducing issuance. We're going to be reducing issuance anyway, and so sort of issuance of the Ether token is going to drop pretty drastically over the next year or two. The second major element is that when we add shards of data to this system, we will make a lot more data available to all the scalability systems that are going live right now on Ethereum 1. So Ethereum 1 almost doesn't need Ethereum 2 for scalability because we're bringing thousands and tens of thousands of transactions via optimistic rollups and zero knowledge rollups and state channels to Ethereum 1. All of those have the need for available data, and a lot of that will be able to be sourced from Ethereum 2. Finally, when we have execution environments, and one called the Ethereum Virtual Machine will be launched on Ethereum 2 first, we're going to be able to take a snapshot of Ethereum, Ethereum 1, and essentially turn it into a shard of Ethereum 2. And so activity will proceed as normal, exponentially grow on Ethereum 1 until it basically finds itself wrapped in the arms of Ethereum 2. So Apple Computer affected a very smooth transition between OS 9 to OS 10, a massively more powerful technology, and they focused on making it seamless for the end user. And so that's exactly what's going to happen on Ethereum.
Well, this is all happening against the backdrop of COVID-19. And if we go back to where we started with this conversation, the changing crypto narrative started in 2008 with the cypherpunk movement. And I would say that we all kind of resemble that personality at the moment as we really dig deep and take a look at societally how much we need to change and structurally how much we need to do still. I want to thank Joe Lubin. I want to thank Mike Novogratz. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us in this conversation. And do stay tuned for the rest of Ethereal Conference. I'm Angie Lau, Editor-in-Chief, Forkast.news, and we'll see you there. Bye, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks, Joe.